Let me take a minute here and show everybody what the radiator support looks like from the inside. That's the front of the car. Engine's behind me, okay? This is what a non-rotted radiator support kind of apron area looks like. You can clearly see this is component number 1. This is component number 2. This is that headlight bucket mounting face that sits on top of the leading edge of that U-channel, which is the lower complete structure of the core support. And then you just have this support, which is spot welded to the sides. This is where the body mount bolt goes. This is where the wheel well mounts. Through these holes here are where the outside air induction scoop bolts go. Over here is rod. All right, welcome back. And we've rounded a big turn here in the project, and that is I have to keep this junk clean. Before I get into cutting up this radiator support that I want to work on, I have to wipe this thing down. Look at the reflection of my new Miller Lite sign. Oh, by the way, let me show you this. This is from a good buddy of ours, Steve, another Steve. They're kind of cool guys. This is a Tune Master kit. Didn't come with the THEAUTOREFINERY koozies that sweet Anna made for us next door. This is a tune kit that he got when he says right around the time that he got his 64 GTO in 69. So he gave it to me knowing I'd clean it up and put it in a proper place, and it's on display above the refreshment cooler. So getting back to this, before I can go cutting up any rusty stuff, I gotta start treating Mr. Jones like we treat the OG. I gotta put plastic or something over that because we don't want to introduce rusty, dusty nonsense to this whole thing after all the hours Joe and I spent wet sanding and buffing this car. Time to preserve this a little bit. Can you imagine? Inside of 2 years, we got to the point where we didn't know what we were doing, to now I know. I gotta spray some detail mist on it, wipe it down, and cover it with plastic. Silly project, a lot of frustration to get plastic draped over a body. But for the most part, it's covered just to preserve the work we've done, so we can just kind of turn our back on that, other than when people come over, they're going to want to peel the cover up and touch the paint, how smooth it is. Ooh, ah. So here we are with the radiator support 69 only. Okay. Pretty solid in places where the battery doesn't reside. And this one is completely and utterly rotted. Cool things here. Let's talk about something real quick. You're in a junkyard, you see a radiator support, and you see this funky thing here. Well, we all know this is a bracket for the outside air induction scoop. Okay, so we're in a junkyard and we see that. And we see this. This is the bracket that goes to the lower of the front fender. Does not have the rubber insulator on the end of it. All right, we have 2 tips here that tell you when you're in the junkyard, if this ever happens. You heard it here. I'm looking at a radiator support for a W car, because we know the W's did not have the rubber insulator on the end of the front fender bracket that went to the bottom of the front fender. They were just direct connection, okay? And we know that this bracket is only required when you're hanging a plastic scoop, like this, under the front bumper. To go a little further geeky, 69, outside air induction, it's a W car. We can tell what rear end is in this car because we see that it's got brackets for a 3-row. And a 3-row radiator in a 69 meant that it had 342 gears, not 391s or 433s. That would have been a 4-row. So you see this piece of junk in the junkyard, and you can say it's from a 1969 W car with a 342 rear. If you know all the little things to look at. Crazy, right? Yeah, total geek out, but I think it's fun. All right, back to work. We're going to decipher how we're going to do this whole thing. Obviously, the lower portion of the radiator support is one piece. Wraps around here. This lower hole, this is where the body mount bushing is. This is the frontmost body bushing that goes on the end of the frame horns in the front of the car. Technically, these are called core support mounts because the body is way behind me at this point, right? Front fender hangs on here, and the front fender bolts to the bottom of the cowl. So this is what the radiator support lives on. But if you're ever driving down the road in one of these cars at night and the headlights are bouncing and everything else, why is this car feeling so loose to me? It's because this bushing, which holds the radiator support off of the frame, is bouncing because this is all compromised. We're going to talk about how I'm going to come up with a plan here. Just like we did with the front fender, we're going to ascertain how many components we have. We know the lower portion, like I said, is one piece. Goes from left all the way to the right, okay? So that's one section of the core support. The other section of the core support is this upright here. It goes on either side of the radiator, spot welded to the lower section, right here, and it encompasses where the headlight buckets mount. Okay? So that's component number 2, or we could say number 2 and number 3. The fourth component, or per side would be the third component, maybe that's how we should do it, is the upper plate that the actual battery tray would sit on. This upper plate goes on after the front portion of the radiator support where the headlight bucket is. And it kind of sandwiches all of this lower U channel, which is the lower piece. So there's 1, 2, 3 pieces here. And then the fourth piece is the actual horizontal piece that goes right along the top. It's where the hood bumpers are. That's where the front fender mounts. That's where the radiator shroud cover goes, all that good stuff. Okay? So we're going to systematically spin this thing around and start taking it apart. And piece by piece, let's not get overwhelmed. Let's piece by piece, let's repair what we have to, fabricate, create what we have to, and then we'll put it all together like it was. Certainly going to be doing some measurements here, because if I get this wrong, this radiator support is going to want to sit too low or too high. So before we go cutting it apart, going to get the notebook out, going to get the tape measure out. That's going to take a fair amount of time, getting dimensions, making sure that the finished distance from where the core support sits on the bushing to the overall height of the core support where it mounts to the fender, that's all very, very non-negotiable. Okay, like I like to say, enough blah, 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 let's get to work. Took my little metal gauge tool, determined that this is 14 gauge metal. Of course, we have 14 gauge metal in stock. Got to have different gauge metal if you're going to be doing these projects, guys. Stock up on some stuff. So we can always install holes once we have a piece that fits, right? I'm thinking what I'd like to do is incorporate the remains of that hole, that body mount hole. See how it's got a curve up here and it's rotted up here, but this is a pretty complex compound curve to do. But if I kept my cut kind of at this line here, and just bear with me a second, what if I did something like this? Actually, more like this. Forget about that first one. What if I came off the edge of the hole, leaving this? That would mean I'd have a tab here, like a point. That's a lot more easily manipulated than if you had to incorporate this up curve. See what I mean? And I would do the same here. This was all rotted, so I was just kind of experimenting here. I would do the same here. And maybe I would just, to leave this hole and then come straight down. All that is great. I guess what I'm saying is let me make a piece that fits this. I'll cut a section out so that I have the actual width to line it up, because obviously if I just lay it over top, it'll then be twice the thickness of the metal off, right? Because it's going to have to go over top of it. I don't want it to do that. I want it to fit in line with that. So let's get some measurements transposed on here first. I know that this flange here, because you take your little trusty caliper and you measure, this tab is 1 1/8 inches. and then it's got to bend. And we all know that you can't bend metal like paper, so the bend is going to take up some real estate, right? And you take, so you know where you're going to start your bend is what I'm saying. I'm going to start my bend at 1 1/8 inches. From here, you know, this is also a depth, can you see that? This is also a depth gauge on the bottom of your caliper. From here, it's a cool 1 inch. The bottom of the caliper is hitting the higher surface, and the depth gauge tab is right there. That's 1 inch. So what I'm doing here is on this piece of metal is I'm gonna transpose that 1 inch. If you can see what I'm doing, can you? No, right there. I'm gonna give myself 1 inch from the bend. There's a mark right there I put another mark right here. So I'll make another straight line there. So at the 1 inch mark, give yourself a little bit of a road map here. Okay. This is going to be the bottom part here or there. We know we're going to have a 1 inch wall, vertical. Then it becomes the flat part that we see. And we're going to then do those measurements again on the other side. Now, look at something here closely. The back side here is flat. Flat, up, flat. Only at the very front do we have that other bend in it. So that's good. You know, and that is consistent with the driver's side here. Just a little bit of a tab there, but this is all flat. What's going to be tricky is if you look here, this flares out, right? Like we just spoke about. So it's not a perfect rectangle that goes across. It does kind of come across and then flare. All right, there's my measurements. We're going to have a flat section, about 1 1/8 inches. A vertical section, 7/8. Was not quite 1 inch, 7/8. Another flat section of 3 1/4 inches, followed by the second vertical section. The last flat section, another 1 1/8 inches, and then this little vertical tab here. This yields, let me see if I can, yeah, this yields about 5/16. So here's my overall length in excess. I am not gonna cut at that line to make this piece, the small workable piece that I'm gonna, you know, actually do my bends on. I'll cut the length because I know this is way longer than I need, but I'll cut the overall piece way up here maybe. Because if you start doing your bends and things start shrinking, man, you don't want to be working all of that metal and then find out you're 1/8 of an inch or so too narrow. That would not be good. I'm already thinking what I'll do is put this in my brake. You know, my brake is just a bunch of angle iron that I strap to my workbench. I'll put this in my brake, but I'll let the metal that I don't want bent at the brake hang out to start incorporating this. You know what I mean? Because when you break it on the angle, when you bend the metal at your brake, whatever you use as a brake, whatever's not in there will just kind of naturally and gradually follow the brake, but not directly. And that's kind of a feel kind of a thing. So if I do that and it works to my advantage, I might have an opportunity to start just, you know, shaping something a little bit there. Because I really want to keep that. Because, you know, when it's on the car and sitting on the frame with the body bushing and everything there, we'll know that I didn't make that straight. I could totally make, not doing it. I'm going to do it my way. You know, for those who are intimidated to take on something like this, I can understand that. But here's my logic. There is no possible way that I or you can make this worse. That's it. What do you have to lose? You only have to gain. You only have to gain the knowledge that you can do it, the confidence that you can do it, and figure out how to make it happen. It's all good for the brain. It's good for the hands to keep busy. And at the end of it, look, if you learn that you can't do it or it can't be done, well, you learned it relatively on the cheap. To buy a rust-free one of these, anybody who's looked, Big money. Now the VIN's not on this. It's not a part that you have to save. There's no special, features on core supports other than those little anomalies that I showed you, which are basically bolt-on parts. So just get in there, cut it up. I see we got a little bit of repair to make here, a little bit of repair to make there. I'm gonna do my brake by the brake that has to come up from this stationary portion. I'm gonna try this game where I clamp my vise piece down and see if I can't flip the piece up with this other angle iron like a hinge just to get it started. I'm also gonna time the piece so that at my 13.5 inch mark, which is the length of the consistent bend on the part, and then it starts flaring out, I gave myself a nice dotted line here. So I think what I'll do is just always keep my vise piece at that 13.5 and just kind of let this flare out on its own. See if I can't make something out of that. Who knows? I might do it this way and find out that that piece of metal is junk. Let me show you a mistake that I caught. Those who've bent metal know what I'm talking about. You can't start on the outside most bend, because eventually you'll get the thing jammed up where you can't put it in your braking device, right? So you got to start basically from the middle so you have a way to work the part. So I'm going to start by putting a 90-degree down from that line. Then I can put the thing in the vise and bend it back the other way. So I just clamped a piece of metal through two other thicker pieces of metal. I'm gonna put it in the vise, and then we will start our bending thing. So I'll get you in the tripod for that. Yeah, I'm not getting this to bend in the vise. It's 16 gauge. So what I did is I actually put a little score line, just a little bit, to give myself a little bit of a head start. Went back to plan A, which is putting it on my angle iron base, clamping another piece of angle iron to the top, and putting a piece of flat stock in the old drill press and bolting this baby right to the workbench. And then just kind of getting it started, I actually took another piece of flat steel and clamped it with vice grips and just bent it down. And then you know how I do. I got the sledging and ball peening, and I got a pretty nice bend. I'll be the first to admit this is pretty crude, but it's effective. Like Papa used to say, the one with the biggest hammer wins. Put a little scribe line, and I mean, guys, just a little scribe. Don't go cutting this thing in half. Just give it you want to encourage that thing, to give it like a little fault line, you know what I mean? So you do that at each place where you want to bend it. And, it's not really fun to do because you're literally using your brawn. I don't have a $2,000 metal brake. And the ones at Harbor Freight, they're not really rated for 16 gauge metal. So my big guns are rated for 16 gauge metal. So, there you have two of the bends that I need. Okay? You're starting to see what we need here, right? You see what's going on? Let's take this over here. Actually, this is this piece, but you see what I mean. We're starting to get a 90-degree shape. So let's do the other, and here's that flare that I'm talking about. Just didn't scribe that. Just let that go at that dotted line where I wanted it to flare out. Because really, in effect, this is going to be like this. And then once we cut that off of there, I can stretch that and make that all happen. So I may be winning, actually. I got this thing starting to see things my way. I have 1, 2, 3 of the bends made of the 5, so that's good. And I took this other little small piece of angle iron in here as kind of like a backstop. I'll do my scribe inside here along my Sharpie line to give the upward other leg of the flange here, the mounting flange. Then we figure out how to make that other tiny little bend. It is by far not easy. And I'm gonna actually knock a lot of these little hammer marks out and polish it all up. But let me just show off a little bit of what I have and how it's gonna work. You guys starting to see what I got going on here? Hours and hours of work already here. Well, there you have it. This is the best I could do without having a break and without a metal break, I mean. So it's more blacksmithery than it is, you know, fabrication at this point. I can knock a lot of this. See all these shadows? These are all hammer marks. This didn't work out according to plan. I just had no way to bend this the first shot. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make this corner on the front and on the back to more resemble this out of separate pieces of metal. You know, when you're dealing with little things, you can grab them with your pliers and just kind of bend it. Like I bent this whole flange here by hand. You could see the plier marks in there. But, you know, there it is. I kept half the, you know, guys, how I like to do it. I like to use a hole, if I can, to index where I'm supposed to be. We know it's a 1-inch hole because I have the remains of the passenger side hole here, 1 inch wide. So I knew that obviously I just had to make this thing 1 inch wide. This bad boy is probably gonna get cut right up here because it's rotted up to there. And metal finished both sides because you'll be able to see the inside of this when the hood is up. And, you know, the Concord judges at Pebble Beach are gonna be looking in there. And this is the next piece we're gonna make because this is the piece that comes down from the top or from the front and sits above the new piece that I just made the other day. And then this plate on the underside here is where the battery tray sits. And you see, this is all due to wonderful battery acid because over here on the passenger side where there's no battery, you can see this is obviously very, very solid. This is all nice and good and straight. Some pitting, but there's no rot there. So what we're gonna do is just take a piece of metal. I'll cut it to length longer. Right, this is the piece that's all rotted. This is what we're gonna make next. And then we'll make this apron repair that has all the bolt hole provisions for the wheel houses and such. Just figured I'd give you a little bit of a better view before I go cutting it apart anymore. It's starting to look more and more like I'm gonna be able to pull this off. Well, all I did is I put a little relief cut on the back side of this piece of metal here so I could do a mild bend to kind of match the contour of what that original part was. Now, I know the piece is long. 3 reasons. 1, I have to put a rib in here. 2, I got to put another rib here. And 3, there's got to be a curl up. So I'm hoping this is actually enough. This is about 3/4 of an inch. And I should be able to keep it within the overall length that I want, even after I put this curl in here, put this curl in here, and then have that kind of 90-degree tab that matches down in here. So I'm gonna try something here. We need to make this piece look like this piece. You can't really tell because it's so rotted, but those ribs that I really want to put in are here. Here you go. Here's a better idea of the profile. See that? And you can see that from the outside underneath, sure. And you can see it from inside the engine compartment that there's these raised ribs here. You know, I just tapped on it a couple times with a hammer and even a chisel and a punch. 14 gauge metal, man. I'm not gonna make that pronounced of a groove in there. It's just not gonna happen. And I'm gonna beat up this piece of metal that I worked so hard on bending. Now look over here in the corner, and what's in the corner but a nice hydraulic press. 20-ton press. I bought from a buddy of mine, Big George. So guess what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna try to press grooves into there. This will be welded as one piece. And these two pieces will be welded to make one piece. And then what I'll do is I'll take my press, putting my workpiece in the middle, right? In this case, I'm gonna go like that. And then we're gonna just press grooves into there. Just start putting a curl in there. Sometimes it really does pay to see if you can do something that can maybe be duplicated. All right, there you have it. I cleaned out the weld that I put down in the middle so that I could have a nice pronounced V. See that? I wanted to weld it up, but I didn't want it to take up the space. This one here just got a little bit boogery because I forgot to turn the gas on. So I ground that one down. But the rest of the welds came out, you know, adequate for a tool here. I'm not building a chopper frame now. This is just to hold metal. But let's look how this fits. I figured I'd line the holes up here so I could maybe hang them on a nail or something, you know, next time I gotta stamp something. I don't know how it's gonna work, but I'm feeling like if I put my workpiece on here and I put the cylinder, you know, the piston from the press on there, and I kind of squish, you know, we'll see how it goes. Well, there it is. It seems to work pretty well. That's the pattern I get. It is a little bit larger. The actual dimension of the bend is a little bit larger. I used the smallest angle iron that I had. But I think I'm gonna go with it. This was me just kind of seeing how much I can max it out. And now I have a little bit of more than a little bit, so I gotta be careful. See how much wider it is? Well, that's not a good one to compare to because it's so rotted. Let's go to here. So you can see the peak is about the same, but it seems like it's a little taller. So I gotta bend it a little bit less and just put more of a more gradual, less deep bend in it. And of course we'll be grinding it and welding it and all that kind of stuff. I just didn't want it to look like from underneath that it didn't have these support ribs in there. I feel like it's completely acceptable. It's completely not perfect. It's not identical to what's there. But this is another reason why it's so important for me to make these ribs. Don't fall. Because they do continue all the way down, and this plate that I have to make another one for the other side definitely has these notches in it to allow for that groove. So there's the method to my madness. Let's see if you guys can see what I'm doing. It's a little dark here for that camera, but I'm not gonna tell you exactly how to use this die. Nobody's gonna use this stamping die that I made. But you just gotta line it up where you want the crease and keep it square where you want the crease to be. It seems like I'm kind of sort of square where I want to be. Again, this is far from, you know, building rockets here. But here we go. And what I was using is this thing here as a spacer so that my workpiece would not fold in on itself. But there it is. And I'm just pressing down and creating a crease. And then you go a little bit more if you ever use a press or anything. You go a little bit more than you want so that the piece kind of springs back. I might have gone a little bit further than I really wanted to go. We'll straighten that thing out right now. So the first one kind of does put that little dimple in there. And then the next one is going to be a little bit better because it'll straighten it back out. All right, here's how it looks in the car. You can clearly see that the ribs I made are not the same exact shape. They're not even really all that. Can you see right there? How this is just this part is just too long. Man, this is tough with one set of hands. I miss having somebody in the garage with me sometimes. This is obviously more of a point. What's in there is more rounded. I can clean that up with a little grinder, you know, to make more of a rounded aesthetic there. That one came out a little bit better. So, look. Some of this is certainly things that you do the best you can with what you have. It definitely looks more intentional outside, but once you look at it in there, you realize I got a fair amount of work to do to make it look like I want. The next thing I'm going to do is cut it to length and try to duplicate that little lippy, which is down there. That's the next thing I'm going to do. But there's a good picture of what the heck I've been doing the last couple nights. Okay? Not so shabby. Let's hope this all goes together and this car doesn't look like it's got, you know, a droopy eye on the left side or something. All right, going to make every attempt to work on this last portion of the radiator support battery box area. The other pieces are fitting really, really nicely, but I think before I go taking everything back apart, I just thought I'd start putting some lines in here where I'm going to cut this off. I can always take more off later on, but again, I like to use these holes as index holes whenever I can. I've kind of traced the holes where they need to be onto the new part, just with a Sharpie. Took some measurements from the corner here to the middle of the bolt hole, which, you know, matches here on the passenger side to the line here underneath the headlights. Just some sort of point of reference. See how nice and straight and rust-free. I mean, yeah, there's surface rust, but it's not rotted there. Great comparison. Now, I told you that this was a flat piece of metal. Well, it is until that. That's a little bit of a detent right there. So we might have to make another stamping die for the press to make that. Oh boy, it's all cut out. This radiator support couldn't do a dang thing if I wanted it to right now. Well, I guess it could sit on half that body mount the way I did that. In the meantime, here's my 5 5/8 piece as compared to this dimension of the original side. I did make it a little bit longer than I wanted, than I need, just to have the extra meat. And these holes, like I showed you before, this is where things line up. These are the holes that have to line up with those marks. Well, that worked out pretty well. I did actually get the contour kind of sort of put in there. It's a bit more gradual than that factory one, but still, it's not a flat piece of metal. And how I did it was pretty basic. You know, I put a piece of, you know, flat stock on the base of my hydraulic press. And then I use another piece to lay on top of this. I kind of did it like this orientation. Okay. And then I took these heavy plates that I have from another project for work. And I use these to actually, you can see the dents that I made. The marks, not dents. And then I pressed with my hydraulic press, pressed down on this with the ram, pushing this whole piece down. And obviously what will happen, as you can see, by doing so, it creates the flat surface of the top of this top flat stock and the donor piece and the project piece. It creates that offset kind of just like the pneumatic flanger does. I'll show you here, my pneumatic flanger. See that for sheet metal? It's the same, let's say focus. It's the same affair. See how it's offset like that? There you go. It's the same thing. You know, you hit the button here, and that gives you a flange when you're doing sheet metal. This one here is much slower, but it did the job. It's not, I guess with the shadow in here, it looks like it's much deeper of an offset than it really is. It's really not that much. But really all it's supposed to do is be an offset of itself, right? So it should be a 14 gauge relief, because I have to make room for this piece that goes on top and below, on top of that U-channel that we made, and above there. So it definitely is a bit more than I needed, but we can always spot weld that, tap that back in. So I guess if you have, this is just a, you know, a Harbor Freight hydraulic press, 20 ton. Great thing to have. You don't use it often, but man, oh man, I bought that from a buddy of mine, like I said, Big George. He used it for a project, doing an Impala, and did the controller on bushings, whatever else he had to do with it, and said, hey, you want this thing? So for a very, very reasonable price, pre-assembled and broken in, it's something that I'm so glad I bought. But if you have one of these, it definitely makes pressing things much, much easier. And I don't use it for much, but this kind of crafty stuff. So if we are all in agreement that I have transposed the holes from the donor plate into the new replacement plate, then let's open up my new, as they call it, Chinesium hole saw kit, and see if we can't drill 3 holes without breaking a bit. 2 1-inch and 1 2-inch. Set them over here in the drill press. Gotta have these things, and clamp it down, safety glasses, all that stuff, and drill some holes. This went very well. 0 issues. Well, a little distraction on the phone allowed me the opportunity to enlarge the hole in the base plate of my drill press. Thank you, Domenico, for that distraction. That's okay, because this piece of nugget right here was never centered the way I like the table centered. It was always kind of funky with paint or something on it. And now I have a nice new shiny 2-inch hole in my work plate. Not a bad thing. That's a happy accident, as they say. So we'll throw that. Actually, I might give this to him as a little reminder of his involvement in some of the auto-refinery content. Good kid he is. All right, so here's the go. Here's the deal. 2 1-inch holes, 1 2-inch hole. If I were to be precise and be confident in my work, I'll do this right in front of you guys to show that. See, slide that there, slide that there, slide that there. Very, very nice. Very nice. Now, obviously these holes are a little funkier because they're just, beat up. So let me take the 1-inch bit here and show you that those are 1-inch holes. And the 2-inch fits just the same. So now what I've done is I've given myself a perfect circle here, and I might index it just like I normally do. I might cut this out of this, go right through that line that I've drawn. So I know that I can match up this hole just the way I like it. This is the remnants of the body mount access hole in the original portion of the radiator support. So if I cut this out of this, then the new piece should be able to mount to that just like it always did. Well, what doesn't take hours, but this has definitely been worth it so far. Here's that upper piece. Those holes drilled in it last night, and I've now cut it to fit inside where I really want it to fit. And you can see where I have the black dot indicates center of where I have to drill holes for the scoop brackets. A couple things. I know that this detent that I put in here, this crease, does not exactly match what was there. I used what I had. I made these stamping dies here, and it worked. And I think when I weld it and grind it and grind it and weld it, I think I'll be able to make it passable. You know, we have a little bit of welding to do up in here on top of some real heavy pitting. I know I'm gonna burn through that, and I'll have to just kind of make do there. What's the other thing that I don't like how it came out? Oh yeah, this reveal here is a little proud of what the lower channel section is. Not really sure how I miscalculated that, but I mean, I can maybe make this one a little bit shorter yet. So that might get an adjustment. I know it lines up here perfectly, but it does flare out a little bit. All of this said, I think what I'm going to do is weld a washer in here just for added support once it's all done. I do have to punch holes in this with the pneumatic hole punch so I can spot weld it all together. And that's basically where we're at. Once it's spot welded and held into place, I can flip it over and start working on these little flare pieces that kind of contour. You see how this stretches out originally? This is not the same dimension. This flares out here. It'll look like that. So I need to make that out of something. Once it's all, you know, said and done and flipped upside down, I can do that. Also, what I did is I measured from the back side of this hole with a tape measure straight up to the fender bolt hole. You know, this part of the radiator support bolts to the front fender. And I have 12 inches to the center. And I have 12 inches to the center over here. So that tells me that I have the pitch and yawn of this bad boy the way I want it, right? So if I measure from the back of that hole to that bolt hole, you guys can see that it's 12 inches to the center of the bolt hole. It's tough to do one-handed, and I promise you, let's see, 12 inches to the center of that bolt hole. So we're good. It means that, you know, this is not laying down, which was my biggest concern, is that I'd have it tight here at the body mount, that it would start drooping away, which I really don't want. Really, once it sits on the body mount and once the fender mounts here, that's really all the structure of the car. The wheelhouse, the plastic wheelhouse, bolts to these three holes here. And then, of course, that bolts to the front fender. So you don't want that to kind of walk around a little bit. But enough of all that. I'll punch some holes in this thing, probably not tonight. And we'll see how it starts welding together. I think this is a relative win so far. Got to get something done every single day, a little bit every day. I just made some marks where I'm going to put some holes with the pneumatic hole punch so that we can really begin to tack this baby together. We know we're going to have to stitch weld along here, old to new, but obviously where new to new goes, new piece to new piece to new piece, that all has to be basically plug welded. So I want to have those provisions in place before I go spot welding to the original part. I said the car, but it's far from a car yet. So before I start spot welding to here, I need to have these provisions in place, right? Because I can't get the hole punch in afterwards. And I'm not about to go drilling little holes. So we got to pull it all back apart, which is not that big a deal. And then fire some holes in there. I'll be back after that. Exciting stuff. Holes are punched in where I think I want them. Yeah, well, that's where they're going. So here's what I've decided I think I'm going to do. I'm going to wait to drill these holes. Now, these are elongated from the factory. So I guess they had some creative allowances with which to mount these pieces. Because you can see that the captured nut, the welded nut underneath here, you guys can see there's a nut welded to the bottom side. That is obviously not an eccentric. That's a permanent spot. So I'm telling myself, as I talk it out loud, that maybe I don't have to create that eccentric hole. Because drilling an oval hole is tough. There's drilling and grinding involved. And, you know, I don't know if you guys have priced oval hole punches lately. They're not cheap, and you're gonna have a washer on that. So what my brain is telling me right now is that these holes are going to be drilled in place. Once I tack it all in, get it to where I want it, which I just moved it a little bit, get it to where I want it, why would I risk drilling these holes and these holes separately? I think I may be better served drilling them all in one spot. All right, so first things first, tack weld, realign things, tack weld, realign things, and then tack weld down. Here we go. All right, the spot welding has begun. It's all spot welded along the top here. Again, that'll all get metal finished. Down here, form follows function, and it's going to be covered underneath this upper plate, but I really want it to be robust. I want it to be solid, so I ran a series of little stitch welds. Get, really good and secure there. I welded on the inside of the body mount. You can see how my hole lined up, but there is definitely a little bit of a rot hole there. When we flip this thing upside down, I'm thinking we'll fix it from that side a little bit because it's easier to work in. And I might grind this flat and weld a washer in there just to shore that up. All right, it's starting to talk to me a little bit. It's falling into place kind of sort of how I like it. All the holes are lining up. Everything is looking like it's supposed to be. I guess by the time you paint it all black and put a battery in here, a lot of this isn't even going to be visible. But still in all, I'm trying to definitely do the best I can do. So. Can you see what I did there? I kind of hammered on that weld because it was getting kind of thin, and there's definitely a little bit of a burn hole there. But that's all going to get kind of cleaned up with a grinder. But look how nice the new metal is laying into the old metal right there. Not too shabby. Sometimes when you're doing spot welds, I always have a problem over there. I had too much wire going in. So what it does is it starts burning the wire, melting the wire to the top part, but not getting hot enough to melt the bottom part. You can see here that I definitely got it into the bottom part. Right, so I slowed the wire down to generate a little bit more heat without going up the next step in heat. Probably got my elbow up in the way. Again, form follows function. I did put a tiny little bead along the backside here. The plastic wheel well liner bolts here. You're not going to see this except for underneath, and I will clean this up with a grinder to give it that more of a flat, non-welded look. But obviously this is not how it was done at the factory. It was pinch welded, with a proper machine. But just to remind folks, it's kind of what we started with. I can't even really show you. I mean, this is the underside of this thing. And then there's this. Right? And I think even this piece is right here. So if you take all this stuff out, I'm telling you, with a gob of free time, some angle iron. I don't know, what did I use? We made the pressing stamping die there, hydraulic press, all these things. Next thing you know, there's the radiator support. Let's flip it over and see how it looks. I'm somewhat pleasantly surprised how this all laid together. I told you I had to make these wing pieces, right? See how this flares out originally? Well, I knew I couldn't do that with the tools that I have here, and basically with my level of relative expertise. That's a pretty complex procedure. So we're gonna just make little caps to go from the bottom corner of the radiator support to the actual, cradle of it. Kind of duplicating that flare. We'll just make little caps to go on there. It's supposed to look something like that, kind of flared, see? But really, it's not too shabby. You can definitely see the difference in the detent here. I'm gonna clean this all up in here, and I'm gonna put another weld out here, only because it's really, really easy to metal finish that. It's on a nice flat surface. I guess one regret I had is that I didn't also drill holes into this so that I could spot weld additionally through here. Doesn't mean I can't, I just gotta be real careful so I don't drill through both. I guess if I drill through both, I just gotta weld it up. So all in all, that's not too bad. That's a fixed radiator support. I mean, just more welding and grinding. I don't know how much further Joe wants me to go in this video. I guess I could bring you along later on. There's even my dotted line. My dotted line is even pretty consistent. It just takes time. It just takes a whole lot of time. But if this is the end of the video, for all intents and purposes, I thank everybody for watching, for sticking around. This has been a lot of work, this one. This has been a whole lot of work to save this core support. But I think we did it. I think we did it. Now we just gotta, finish welding it and grind it up. Short of making these cap pieces. All right, maybe I'll just bring you along for the aftermath of that. All right, if I haven't asked you before, click the subscribe, share it. It does help us. It does help us. We're in a bit of a slump. We want to pull out of that. All right, guys, next time.